All right, so continuing to place my references. All my resolution is right. Now I just need to kind of lasso. With lots of overlap. Always lots of overlap. And in fact, I might turn off my guides because you'll notice as you use the lasso near the guides, your lasso will snap to them. So if you just hit Command semicolon, it will hide your guides while you're doing this. Then you can always get them back. And then once you've selected what you want from your smart layer, you hit Command J, duplicate it onto a new layer. Then you can move them into place. And for little subtle movements, you can use your arrow keys. Now notice, this is a background piece, right? And so I might as well move that layer behind these other layers. And I can do that with Command left bracket. Kind of move it down through the layers, just like that. Or if I want it to be on top of this layer but not there, that's just fine. And then most likely I'm going to edit out a lot of this. So we'll see how that is done. I don't know if I want that lake yet. Okay, so next one. This is the starry sky. Luckily, there's a lot of it here. I lasso what I want, duplicate it with Command J, turn off the smart layer, bring it down and behind. And then I can move it behind the other layers. And it's there. So that's 1 through 4. Now, number 5. What I like about labeling my layers is you'll notice that the titles are the smart objects as they come in as well. So H5 here, that's my next one. This one's a little trickier because I just want the icicles. I don't want, I really just want these icicles. So I'm more selective here, though I'm going to overlap a lot. I don't really want the building or the trees or anything else. I just want the icicles. So I duplicate that, turn it off, move this into place. If I'm forgetting where the edge of my composition is now, that's where I turn my guides on. And I see, oh yeah, the bottom of my or the top of my composition is right, intended to be right there. And then I flip these around. I wanted these coming from the ground. I wanted them coming at a slight angle. So I might be playing with this in some interesting ways. But right now it will sit right there, and I'll put it behind this layer. There we go, just so it's nestled behind. Even though it's a pretty strong foreground element. Next, number 6. These black rocks I wanted in the foreground. And I want to use as much of this kind of overlap as I can. It's all helpful. Duplicate it. Turn off the smart layer behind. Move this behind the icicles. And number 7. This one I'm not so sure of. I basically want these trees. And probably all of this snow in the foreground as well. Duplicate that, turn off the smart layer, push it behind. Now obviously that one's colored very differently, very different light quality. But that tree line, that is helpful. Okay, so now my X factor, my optional strange item, kind of fill in. What do I want from this? I don't know. So I'll just roughly select around this cloud of seeds. See if I can use it. Duplicate that, turn it off. Move it back and behind. Maybe in the foreground, actually. Yeah, I think it could work pretty well here. There's an element on the ground. All right. So then I turn my guides back on. Then I can kind of push things to the edges, make sure my mountains are where I need them to be. All that good stuff. And now I have to start cleaning them up. Okay. So I move all of my visible assets together like that. And I'm going to select them all. Move all of my turned off smart layers. Move those below. So I'm going to select them all. Just hold down Shift and you can select all these layers that are turned off. Then move them down, 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 down. Just on top of your sketch. And so now I can work on these different divisions. Now you can do this a lot of different ways. I tend to work from the back forward because I don't like to waste a lot of effort. So I'm going to turn off these foreground elements for now, get to the background, and start blending these together. And I'm going to start with this one right here. So I know I don't want this sky. So what options do I have? Well, one is I can just use my lasso, turn off the guide so it doesn't affect my lasso, and I can just roughly cut out this sky. Maybe leave the biggest clouds. And then roughly cut it out. Delete. And then if I really want to soften that edge, I can say refine edge, even though I've only selected empty space. I can feather it and kind of expand that selection out. You can see in the preview, it's kind of pushing that edge down. I'm going to feather it by quite a bit. See, it's almost like giving it a drop shadow. There we go. And I'll zoom in so you can see what it does. So by increasing that, I've feathered my selection that I lassoed to erase. So when I click now, it will soften it. When I hit delete, I can hit delete a couple times. So now it's a soft edge, which is a little helpful. Right? But the big thing is not just controlling the edge, which I could also do with my eraser tool, using a soft edged eraser, so maybe like a hardness of around 10, pressure sensitive for size. I could go in and softly erase out and get right up to that mountainside. But there's more to make things match. that you can do much more powerful and important things than just cutting things out really well. So the big difference between this sky, this is supposed to be morning light, right? And these mountains is that this is very blue and this is very warm. This is very bright, this is very dark. This is very light, but not very blue. So with this layer, I'm going to play with its color. So these are what we call direct adjustments. And I'm going to shift the temperature of its color to not be so cool. And that will help it match. And then I can also shift its values to see if I can get it to kind of fit in with the mistiness of these mountains a little bit better. So I go to Image, Adjustment, and I'm going to show you my favorite tools. The first is Levels. And it's like what we were doing with Preview earlier, just with our sketches. I can just take the midtones. It's always safe to play with the midtones. And I can push them a little bit darker. I can take the highlights and limit them so they're not quite so bright. I think that might be helpful. I don't want to take the shadows and push them because then I'll just lose visual information. I don't want to take the highlights and push them up or I'll lose visual information. So playing with the midtones and playing with limiting is a good way to use levels. But the big change for this is going to be with my next favorite tool. So levels is my first, then color balance. It's a very subtle tool, but it can change the temperature. So I start with the midtones and I'm going to shift it away from the blues on the cyan and towards the reds, because there's a lot of red in this. I'm going to shift it a little bit away from the yellows, a little bit towards the blues, and then also a little bit towards the greens, just in the midtones. Then I'm going to do it in the highlights. That makes a big difference there. I don't want to do it too much. I'm just trying to knock out that extra blue. And then in the shadows. And then the last tool, which I always use last because it's the most powerful, and you don't want to overdo it, is hue saturation under image adjustments. These are all direct adjustments, which means they affect the pixels in your layer. And I'm just going to take the saturation down a little bit. Now, if you up the saturation, it becomes really colorful. I want to take some of the color out. Then I can shift the hue a little bit too towards something just slightly cooler. And then I can shift the overall lightness or darkness. I'm going to shift the overall lightness just down a tiny bit. All right, so all those changes I made, they're in my history here. Hue, saturation, color balance, and levels. Look at it. And then if I undo all of those, look how much difference it makes without having to erase anything. So now I can go in with my soft-edged eraser at 100% opacity still. And I can get rid of any remaining blue. I want to get rid of any of that remaining blue because there's not going to be blue in the sky anymore. I can roughly get the edge of the mountains, but I can see it a lot more clearly now that I've adjusted the color and the levels. This is why it's really nice to have sharp in focus reference material. And then, depending on the textures, I'm going to take my eraser, make it bigger, and I'm going to do something called ghosting. So this is what I like to do instead of lowering my opacity, which will leave lots of little brush strokes, even with a soft brush. I still leave my